Welcome to Tenant Action Today. If you believe in tenants' rights, and if you want to help preserve the housing that we have and expand the supply of affordable housing, you tuned to the right channel. Among other things, you will be able to call in and ask a question about a problem you're having with your landlord or about your rights as a tenant and get an answer from a tenant attorney right here on the air. You will also get some of the latest news of interest to tenant advocates, and from time to time, we will have short how-to segments that should help in our efforts to educate tenants about their rights. Finally, and most important, you will learn how you can help the campaign to restore our rent and protection laws, which are due to expire in a few short months and are in danger of being phased out. My name is Michael McKee. I'm a community organizer. I'm the treasurer of the Tenants Political Action Committee and a board member of the Metropolitan Council on Housing, the citywide tenant union. Throughout the next hour, we are going to give you information about sources of advice and information for tenants. Sometimes this will be on the bottom of the screen, sometimes on a title card, so you might want to get a pen and paper so you can write them down as we go along. My guest for this program is Tim Collins of the tenant law firm Collins, Dobkin and Miller. Welcome, Tim, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Same to you. And it's great to be here and an honor to be in the inaugural edition of Tenant Action.
Yes,
today.
And I should point out that in addition to being my guest tonight, you are going to be an occasional host on this new program, Tenant Action Today. Before we take calls, here are some brief news items and announcements of interest to tenants. In a unanimous vote, the New York City Council this afternoon elected Melissa Mark Viverito as the new speaker. The speaker has accurately been described as the second most powerful elected official in the city, second only to the mayor. Mark Viverito is a former organizer for 1199, the healthcare workers union, who represents a council district that joins parts of East Harlem to parts of the South Bronx. She was supported by the Progressive Caucus in the council and also by our new mayor, Bill de Blasio. Her only remaining opponent, Dan Garodnick of Manhattan's East Side, conceded the election to Mark Viverito before the vote. She is the first Latina to hold what is in effect a fourth citywide elected office. Even though the 51 council members are elected to represent their own districts, in effect the speaker represents the entire city. Secondly, Governor Andrew Cuomo today announced a $2 billion tax cut package in his State of the State speech in Albany. Included in the package is an income tax credit for renters whose household income is less than $100,000 per year. The governor's office stated that this will save renters in New York State a total of $400 million, and that most of the benefit will go to tenants in New York City. Tenant advocates have not seen an actual bill, so it is not clear how the tax credit would work. The package also directs tax relief at homeowners in upstate New York and the suburban counties and would greatly reduce state taxes, increasing the exemption from $1 million to more than $5 million. Progressive groups have described this as a giveaway to rich New Yorkers. Also, the Wall Street Journal reported this week that rents across the United States rose almost a full percentage point in the last quarter of 2013. And that the total increase for the year was 3.2%. The national vacancy rate for apartments has dropped to 4%, down from a high of 8% 4 years ago. New York City remained the most expensive market, with asking rents increasing 4 percentage points to an average of $3,100 per month. And in one of the first acts of his administration, our new mayor, Bill de Blasio, reversed a cruel policy imposed on homeless families by Mayor Mike Bloomberg when a winter storm descended on New York City last week. This has to do with what city homeless officials refer to as a code blue situation, when the temperature drops below freezing. In the past, anyone who showed up at the city's intake center in the Bronx in freezing weather was given shelter. But last year, Bloomberg implemented a new policy, and the city began turning away many homeless families, including children, sending them back out into the cold to fend for themselves. On his second day as our mayor, Bill de Blasio changed this policy, and anyone seeking shelter in the snowstorm and its aftermath was accommodated. Good work, Mayor de Blasio. Finally, the Tenants Political Action Committee is honoring our new public advocate, Letitia James, at a fundraiser this Friday evening at 6:00 p.m. The event will be held at Local 802, the Musicians Union, at 322 West 48th Street. Tickets begin at $25. For information, email action@tenantspac.org. That's action@tenantspac.org, and we will have information about that up on the screen later. So, Tim, lots of news.
A lot of news, a lot of good news. But, you know, Michael, I can't help but having a little bit of cynicism every time there's this breath of fresh air.
You're so cynical.
Yeah, I'm not by nature necessarily, but, you know, I've just...
We've been disappointed
We've
a few
been
times.
disappointed many times,
Yes.
and Mayor de Blasio shows so much promise. You know, he has all the right credentials, has said all of the right things, seems to have all of the right sensitivities. You know, our hopes are high, but, you know, we need to see how things are going to play out. As you know, we both follow the City Rent Guidelines Board very closely.
Yep.
And over the last 4 or 5 years, the Bloomberg administration engineered a rather brilliant, subtle, pro-landlord policy of incremental rent increases, which were just above what were really warranted given the changes in operating costs. And there were some real problems with some of the numbers that they were looking at and relying on in setting those rents. So we've had, through the heart of a recession, a 5-year period, a series of guidelines which were absolutely unwarranted and excessive. They should have really leaned the other way. In fact, they leaned towards the landlords. They overlooked mistakes that were made that were favorable to the landlords. And consequently, we have this situation where we really need to do some makeup. We really need to slam the brakes on at this point.
Well, you're right. And of course, in terms of the rent board, the mayor controls the appointments all by himself. Does not need to submit the people he chooses to the city council for approval. That's a law we're trying to get passed to change that. Mm-hmm. And in fact, de Blasio has said he supports submitting such nominees to the city council for approval. So he can immediately appoint a new chair,
right?
Because the chair serves at the pleasure of the mayor.
That's right.
One public member has resigned.
Mm-hmm.
There are 3 other public members whose terms are not up until the end of this year, the end of 2014. Mm-hmm. But in the past, sometimes when a new mayor comes in,
right,
people will resign as a courtesy if the new mayor asks them to do that.
Right.
And of course, the 5 public members are the most important because they are majority on the board.
That's right.
And unfortunately, Bloomberg appointed people who did not think rent stabilization was a good thing, and apparently thought their job was to protect landlords and to protect landlords' profits and enhance landlords' profits, when they should have understood that their job really is to maintain housing as an affordable commodity that people can actually afford to live in.
Right.
So we're reasonably hopeful that in terms of these appointments, de Blasio is going to, do the right thing, and he has promised in writing to consult with tenant groups about appointments to the board, not only tenant members but public members. Mm-hmm. And he has also called for a 1-year rent freeze. Mm-hmm. He repeated that call in October after he had won the primary in September, right, and before the November election, when it was clear he was going to win the November election. In fact, he won in a blowout. Right. So he does seem to understand that, and I'm sure he's going to do things that we're not going to be happy about. But and I'm sure any mayor is going to end up doing something at some point that you're not going to be happy about. But I think it'll be a lot better than Bloomberg.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think what we had with Bloomberg was a careful choreography, a politicized process of not, wrecking the rent stabilization system, because I think Mayor Bloomberg recognized that it was essential to protect middle-income New Yorkers who are trying to survive in the city and pay their rents.
I'm not sure about that.
I think, well, at a minimum, I'm sure that he recognized that any transition should not be abrupt because it would be catastrophic. But I have little doubt that he did want to see a transition, and that it was incremental, and that was what was carefully engineered over the last 5 years, and that's what we really need to reverse. So, this comes as a real breath of fresh air. Hopefully, and there's no question, and as you know, by the way, for many years, I was not a supporter of rent freezes. I didn't make recommendations when I appeared before the Rent Guidelines Board for any specific increase or lack of increase. But in recent years, I've been increasingly alarmed. Some people might describe me as being shrill in appearing before the board and writing. We had the report March to the Market last time.
I don't think you're really you could ever be described as shrill.
Well, I suppose some people think so, but it's only out of exasperation for what I've witnessed and this consistent excessiveness of these rent increases. There is no question that they have to slam on the brakes with a rent freeze now, and beyond that, we need to ramp up our fight for home rule. Yeah. There's no reason why Albany politicians should be controlling the significant housing policies in the city that are having a dramatic effect. And the amazing thing is that we're hearing a lot from scholars and pundits and so on about the tale of two cities, the growing gap between the haves and the have-nots, and a lot of people point to housing as a critical issue. But we don't talk that much about rent regulation as a policy that was the most, the deepest protection of affordable housing, and the fact that a lot of the stress and tension from this gap between the haves and the have-nots has to do with the fact that the city and the state have allowed rents to rise excessively now for well over a decade. It's a messy system. There's no question about it. There are the conventional naysayers of rent regulation, a lot of academics who look at it in a very theoretical, abstract way and say, oh, rent regulation is such a terrible thing, without looking at what really happens in a market like New York, in a market where there is a very strong suppression of new supply because of other urban problems that we're dealing with. We need green spaces.
Well, and as we just saw from the Wall Street Journal report, New York City remains the most expensive market in the nation.
And in part because the city and the state have undertaken measures to protect the quality of life in the city.
Zoning.
And zoning is a huge thing, and buildings codes, and the fact that we invest in all of those things that make the city an attractive place for newcomers. All of that creates a tremendous windfall for the owners of existing property. And even though on an individualized basis, zoning doesn't, on an aggregate, on an overall basis, it certainly does.
Well, it certainly makes it. I mean, if you just opened up the city to development, and if you allowed developers to plow under Central Park and build housing, you could solve the housing crisis.
Absolutely. Get rid of zoning, get rid of the building code. You can build anything you want, wherever you want, at any height. Regardless of whether they're the amenities, the subway system, or the parking spaces, or whatever. Build whatever you want. Housing, as we know, would become very, very cheap, and existing properties would collapse in value given the new competition from new supply, but it would be a horrible place to live. And so as a consequence of all of these inputs, the owners of existing housing have a privileged position, and rent regulation helps to even that playing field. And I think that was always I
think de Blasio understands that. I really do. And he has committed to fight for home rule. He has committed to go to Albany with us, with tenants, both this year and next year when the rent laws are actually up for renewal in Albany. We've never had a mayor go to Albany with us. We've never had a mayor who really took on rent regulation as an issue and said this is important. And I think that's going to be a game changer, but we'll see.
Well, I'm going to correct you. I think in 1920, I think it was Mayor Hyland went up to
back when you were
that's right, went up and spoke to the legislature, which that morning had expelled.
That's correct. The 1920s rent laws. Yes.
Right. That morning, the legislature had expelled its socialists, newly elected socialist members.
3 assembly members had been expelled because they were members of the Socialist Party.
And the mayor went to Albany and said, "You gentlemen are trying to rid this chamber of socialism. The first thing that you have to get rid of is the speculating landlord who's creating these problems."
And they enacted the 1920s rent laws.
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay, now we have a phone call. Hello? Hello? Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hi, you're on the air.
Hi, I have a J51 question.
Okay.
And I'm a rent-regulated, rent-stabilized tenant and a non-evict tenant in a co-op converted building, and I have a J51 already in effect. The DHCR notified me in 2011, the fall, that as a rent-stabilized tenant, I was entitled to a certain amount of money, not a huge amount, so when my
You mean
lease,
an overcharge?
well, it's what MCI work that was done, and so when my lease was up for renewal in February of 2012, I renewed 2 years. That amount was deducted from my base rent, and then the increase went forward in that. So that amount was deducted, and now going forward, my lease is up and renewing in February, and my landlord says, and he may be right, I don't know, that the amount that is already deducted, that they base the RGB increases on, that amount is going, there's no added monetary benefit that comes up on the renewal, that amount is in the base figure, and it remains so each time the renewal comes up until the end of the J51 several years down the road. So my question is he right? I mean, it sounds like he might be totally right, but I thought I should check into it.
I think this is the kind of question that is very hard to answer without actually seeing the paperwork. I'm frankly very confused by your description.
Oh.
An MCI normally results in a rent increase, not a rent decrease.
Well, I did have a rent increase, huge rent increase.
And DHCR found that you had been overcharged and they reduced your rent?
No, the building subsequently applied for J51. So that went through, and so the rent-regulated tenants were allowed.
Oh, the offset, the
The
J51 offset. You know what? I don't think we can give you a definitive answer, but essentially the way the law works is that if a landlord does certain kinds of building improvements and gets benefits from the city, tax benefits from the city under the J51 program, the tenant is supposed to get an offset against the rent increase.
That's
that must be what you're talking about.
Yes.
I think somebody needs to see your papers and go over this with you. You know, Met Council has a weekly housing clinic every Tuesday evening on the Lower East Side, and there are a number of other organizations throughout the city that have housing clinics.
Well, I know what's in effect is correct, but my question was going forward based on that correct lease amount for the last 2 years. I know that amount is correct. My question was really going forward.
Oh, what is the base rent for purposes of renewal?
It doesn't change as long as they keep that base rent in there with the deduction in there. Going forward, they don't add, I don't get more deductions, and they don't get more.
Can you give the caller an answer?
I think you've given the right answer. I think the relationship between MCIs and J51s and how they get calculated into rent can be very complex. I think that if your question is if the J51 is this is a tax benefit to the owner when they do upgrades in a building, which in some cases will bring the building under rent stabilization if it's not already under rent stabilization, and you know, it could be phased out over time. Again, this gets very complex, but I don't believe that you should have an added increment to your MCIs. And bear in mind that there should be a 6% cap, annual cap, on the implementation of the increase.
Okay, that already all happened.
Okay. So is your question whether or not the rent will be increased again once the J51 is expired?
Well, yes. Will that be true?
I don't think so.
Oh, because it says so on the DHCR document they sent me to inform me in the first place that I even had this, which I wouldn't have known without that document. But I have a small building.
I'm sorry, it says what on the document? It says
that it would end, that they could put back that amount. It's like $20 at the end of the J51.
Is your apartment stabilized by virtue of the J51?
No, that's
Okay.
nothing to do.
It was already stabilized.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's probably correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's the best answer we can give you.
Well, thank you very, very much.
Thanks for calling. Good luck.
Bye.
You know, I mean, it's really hard to answer these kinds of questions when you don't see the paperwork in front of you.
Yeah.
And I was getting really, how can an MCI result in a rent reduction?
For the folks who are listening, and you hear things like MCI, RGB, J51,
DHCR.
it can get very complicated. Basically, under the rent stabilization system, owners are entitled to do major capital improvements, and they're generously compensated. We would argue, too generously compensated. As 1/84th of the value is allocated to each unit based upon the number of rooms in the unit. And in fact, it is a good part of the rent stabilization system because it encourages owners to upgrade and maintain their buildings. So, replace boilers every now and then.
It's good and it's bad.
Well, I think it's good in the sense
It's good in the sense of maintaining housing. It can be very bad in terms of affordability.
It's very bad in terms of affordability.
We've seen buildings where rents have gone up 40 and 50% in a matter of a very few years, and it's always because of major capital improvements.
Well, the problem is the way it's structured in that they're permanent increases rather than...
And they can load as many as they want to at a time.
Right, but...
There should be some kind of limit on this, and they should be temporary, and that's a bill we've been trying to get passed for years.
I think that's the real answer. There's no reason why an owner who installs a boiler or who does work on the facade or a new roof should be able to collect the increase in perpetuity, even though that item may have to be replaced again.
Since they can be the tenant pays it off in full in 7 years in normal circumstances. Okay, now we have another call. Hello.
Yes, hello.
Hi, you're on the air.
Yes, I would like to make first a brief comment, and then I have a question, if
Go
that's
ahead.
okay. My brief comment is this. I also believe that there should be some sort of rent regulation. However, I'm also going to clarify. I am a small building owner. I see high-rises being built in Manhattan every day that have absolutely no rental restriction, absolutely none. I, as the landlord of a small building, get a 3%. You're talking about capital improvements. You're assuming that I have the money to do these capital improvements. When I get insurance increases and property tax increases that far outweigh whatever I get in terms of income from the building, where I end up paying out of pocket, that the building doesn't pay for itself. Now,
where's your building? Do you mind telling us the neighborhood?
All these multi-million-dollar complexes are built. There's no regulation on them, but there's regulation on the small building owner. It's simply unfair. There should be a scale based on income that a property gets and based on expenses that a property has, that they get.
We get your point.
A rent regulation.
We get your point, and we understand. Where is your building located? What neighborhood?
In Manhattan, in Chelsea.
And how big is the building? How many apartments?
12.
12, okay. And certainly when you're talking about the problems with real property taxation, you'll certainly get no disagreement out of me. Apartment buildings in general are overassessed, and certainly in New York City they are overassessed compared to single-family homes. And water and sewer charges in particular are a very serious problem. And the reason for that is that for at least 2 decades, the New York City Water Board has loaded all of the capital costs of upgrading and protecting the water treatment and distribution system into the rates. I mean, so all of the work that's been done to protect the watershed and the Catskills, to build a filtration plant, the new tunnels, instead of treating those like capital expenses and floating bonds, they have passed it on to the ratepayer, homeowners, and apartment building owners. And don't forget that you pay the real property tax and you pay the water and sewer charges, but you pay it out of the rents you collect. And if you couldn't collect rent, you wouldn't be able to pay it. So the tenants, in effect, pay it. But these are very serious problems that I think need to be addressed, and I think they have a direct impact not only on landlords but on tenants, because they directly feed into keeping rents up and keeping rent increases high. But I don't think I would agree with you, and I'll let Tim speak for himself, that small buildings like yours should be exempt. I think there might be other things that could be done, including certainly a fairer real property taxation system. But you also said you had a question.
Well, the question for me is, why isn't there legislation for high-rise buildings, especially, as you know, what's going on now in Hudson Yards?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that there's a rent stabilization of sorts for those luxury complexes that are charging $5,000 and $6,000 and $10,000 and $15,000 a month. Why does poor schmo me, all right, have to be thankful for a 2% increase when everything else has gone up 15 and 20%?
Well, you're actually asking, you're making the same statement by asking the question. I mean, on the issue of the luxury condos and luxury rental housing, I agree with you. I don't think the development of this kind of housing is actually a good thing. I think it's a negative thing.
Well, I agree. And the fact that we want to maintain rents at a reasonable rate so
and
people
you want to
don't
maintain
leave the city.
The low-rise character of Chelsea.
Right.
Yeah.
And well, that's in and of itself. My building's one of the few that's still there. But
Right.
what I'm saying, though, is, you know, we talk about we want to keep the rents low so people can afford to live in the city or keep the rents lower. Fine. Hit those large buildings. Don't hit me.
Well,
Don't
the large
hit me where I'm
the
ending
large
up
buildings
paying out
are
of
either
pocket because of rent stabilization.
Okay, you've made your point.
Okay.
Tim, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think, first of all, thank you for calling. I think it's a healthy thing for somebody to call who is a landlord and is, looking at the world through the lens of a landlord's problems, to call into a program like this with two tenant advocates, quite frankly.
Yes.
I can tell you that, public policy generally operates on the basis of averages and general information. And I can tell you that the rent increases by the city's Rent Guidelines Board over the last several years have been in excess of changes in operating costs. And by and large, owners have been immunized against the effects of this recession. In fact, there was probably no better investment in the United States of America just after the recession broke, other than perhaps, gold and a few other precious metals, than rent-stabilized housing. Rent-stabilized housing continued to grow in income and in value at a time when other things were collapsing. It is an extraordinarily stable investment and positive investment if it is well managed. Now, I understand.
Well, that's the point.
Now, I understand that there are some buildings and there are some small property owners who experience, unique and particularly hard circumstances. There is a hardship mechanism in the law. It's not a great mechanism, but there is one that addresses those issues in the extreme. It's hard for me to believe, quite frankly, and you sound like a very sincere woman, but it's hard for me to believe that somebody who owns 12 units in Chelsea is not turning a substantial profit. And I would suggest that if your tax liability is really high, then you may want to consider challenging your taxes, which are supposed to be calibrated to the building income. You should be filing an income and expense statement with the City Department of Finance every year.
Which I do.
And they are supposed to charge you taxes that are commensurate with what you're reporting for income. So you should be getting a return. Now, the average building in the city spends something of about approximately
62 cents.
About 62 cents of every rent dollar collected goes to operating costs. The balance goes to capital improvements, financing, and income to the owner. And so if older buildings generally get a little bit less.
And smaller buildings.
And smaller buildings get a little bit less because of economies of scale. But nonetheless, the value of properties like yours has skyrocketed over the last 50 years in the city, notwithstanding the presence of rent regulation. So the numbers, the data, the information that we have available shows that rent regulation has not only protected owners, but it's probably been too generous to owners, and it's led to a severe affordability crisis. You won't get greater sympathy from anyone, greater than I about issues of excessive taxation, particularly in areas with low-income housing, where those taxes are ultimately, as Michael said, paid by the tenants. And I think the same is true to some degree with water and sewer charges.
But you also have to understand one simple thing. These apartments that are now rent stabilized started off with rent control. And so when you start off with rent control rent, and then you start increasing, you're starting at a much lower base.
No, that's not true, because
it is
whenever,
true.
excuse me, ma'am, whenever a rent-controlled apartment is vacant, this has been the law for 40-odd years, and it's still the law. Whenever a rent-controlled tenant moves out or dies, the landlord can raise the rent to market, and there's nothing to stop you from doing that.
Well,
and then it goes under stabilization. It's subject to challenge, but very few tenants challenge the initial rent.
It's a very small percentage of tenants challenge, file what's called a fair market rent appeal. And even when they do,
there's like a few hundred a year.
The increases that are allowed on fair market rent appeals are very large. They're virtual market at this point. So there has been.
If you haven't been doing that, then you've been missing out. I mean, as an owner.
Obviously have been missing out.
Yeah, and I think Tim's advice about.
If there's a discrepancy in the area between fair market rent and rent stabilized rent, there's nothing that can be done.
No,
correct? Unless I do, as you said, capital improvements and the like.
Well, I think Tim's suggestion about filing a challenge to your real property tax assessment, you might want to talk to a real estate attorney about that, or an accountant, because it's entirely probable that you're paying too much in real property tax. Many apartment buildings are.
Excuse me?
Many apartment buildings are paying much higher taxes than they should be. So you might want to look into that. But and I want to repeat what Tim said, is thanking you for calling. And
well, I think
we're always happy to have this kind of discussion. Yeah, there is, but you won't get us to agree that your apartment should be deregulated. That we will part company on.
No, and I never said that. What I am saying is the high-rises should also be subject to regulation.
Well, many of them are, but the problem is that when a new building is built and the landlord voluntarily puts the rental apartments under rent stabilization in return for quite lucrative tax benefits that we as taxpayers pay, the landlord can set the initial rent at market, and then it goes under rent stabilization. I don't frankly think it helps the city to have apartments coming online that are going to be rent stabilized and charging $5,000 and $8,000 a month. I honestly don't believe that helps anybody except rich landlords and developers. And it certainly changes the character of a neighborhood like Chelsea. And you ain't seen nothing yet. We're going to have a whole wall of high-rise glass and steel towers marching up the High Line, and it's just now begun.
And it's just unfortunate because Chelsea's losing its character.
Yes, that's true. I live in Chelsea, and
Excuse me?
I live in Chelsea, and
so you see it.
I love the fact that it's low rise and low density.
Yep. Well, thank you for your time. And
thank
again,
you, ma'am.
I think it's
Good luck.
That
Thanks for calling.
Thank you.
That was an interesting thing. I love it when we get into this kind of policy stuff instead of somebody saying, tell me what to do about my landlord.
Yeah, no, I think it's instructive when a sincere person calls a landlord talking about their problems. It allows us to look at where those problems are coming from, and one of them clearly is taxation. A lot of landlords don't.
And Mayor de Blasio has made numerous statements that he thinks the real property tax system is screwed up and needs to be revisited and rethought.
Another area where landlords can make great strides, and many have, the more sophisticated ones, is in energy efficiency.
Right.
Getting updated boilers, getting windows that are, more thermal in nature, and heat protective. All of those things can drastically cut down on the oil costs for a building and save money.
And there are some programs that landlords can get assistance in things like that, energy conservation and things. Perhaps she doesn't know about them.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're going to take one more call, and then we're going to take a break and show you a very interesting film. So, hello.
Hello.
Hi, you're on the air.
Yes, thank you so much. I am calling in reference to a bill passed along. Is this Is this legal? I've been in this
Are you-
apartment for over 50 years, and now my landlord's been charging me fuel pass along
So
for
you're
2
rent
years.
you're rent controlled, not rent
Yes.
stabilized. Yes.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it is legal. Landlords of rent controlled apartments, unlike rent stabilized apartments, can get a separate rent increase for fuel. It's called the fuel cost pass along.
Yes.
You might want to be very careful about checking the arithmetic because it's a dollar amount. What advice would you have for the caller?
Well, I think there is a fuel cost pass along for rent-controlled
We're
tenants.
trying to get it repealed.
And, I would agree that they should take a close look at the numbers to make sure that they're consistent. But it's a complex system, and they have to pay it. The purpose of the fuel cost pass along really had to do with when we had oil shortages and prices were volatile, which they still are to some degree today.
It was implemented in 1979.
Right, and the idea was that landlords had these big spikes in oil costs.
Fuel costs were very volatile.
Right, but we still have that, and I think that if I'm not mistaken, fuel's come down a little bit in the last year.
It has.
So I think most of our listeners who do pay fuel cost adjustments can expect a significant reduction.
In 1979, when this was enacted, there were like 600,000 rent-controlled apartments still in the city. Now we have like 35,000.
Right.
So there aren't very many rent-controlled apartments left. The rent-controlled tenants who are left are mostly almost all elderly. Their incomes, on average, are much lower than rent-stabilized tenants.
Right.
And we want to repeal the fuel pass-along. We want to repeal the MBR, the maximum base rent. So you might. Are you a member of a tenants association?
No, I'm not. No.
Okay. You might want to join a tenants organization, either in your neighborhood or a citywide group like Met Council, and get involved in the campaign to repeal the fuel pass-along.
How can I find out where they are in my neighborhood? I'm in Manhattan, around 118th Street.
Well, you give Met Council a call, or and we will refer you to a local group, or tell you where you can go to get some help. There's a hotline. Met Council has a hotline every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 1:30 to 5 o'clock. And that's the number there on the screen. You can call and talk to a live person. And among other things, they can tell you where to go to get some advice and help, and what organization you can join. You can join Met Council. You can join a local organization. And we need more people to get involved in the political struggle to change the rent laws.
Well, I'm certainly one who will try and get involved.
Let me just add one thing. Although you don't sound like you're a day over 39, if you happen to be 62 or older.
I'm over 80.
Okay. I wasn't going to ask. You can apply, if you don't already receive it, the Senior Citizen Rent Increase Exemption. And that should protect you from these rent increases.
But your income has to be below the threshold, which is currently $29,000 a year.
How much?
$29,000 a year.
No, I'm not making that.
Yeah.
Well, if you're not making that, then you really should have.
If your income is below that, you should apply for SCREE.
I did. I've been turned down 3 times. They tell me because I need a lease. I never had a lease since I've been here.
That's not correct. Rent control, you don't need a lease. But you should call the hotline and get somebody to help you. And because unfortunately the city turns a lot of people down for SCREE and for DRE, which is the Disability Rent Increase Exemption Program. And if you've been turned down 3 times and your income's below $29,000 and you're rent controlled, you don't need a lease.
Yeah,
that's incorrect.
You may also want to be in touch with your city council member who can probably push the right buttons to make sure that you get the attention you need.
All right.
Give a call to the hotline. And
thank you so much.
Thanks for calling,
You're
ma'am.
welcome.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, viewers, we're going to take a brief break and show you a special treat. This is a film of a demonstration against a major New York City real estate developer, Larry Silverstein, that took place on December 4th. The film was produced by Alessandro and Maeve Cavadini, a father-daughter team. We'll be back when it's over. Enjoy.
I need a guy to rent the corner. Mic check! Mic check! Mic check! Mic check! Mic check!
I should really get it. So what brings you out here today, specifically the infill plan?
The infill plan, yes, because Bloomberg is trying to get this done before he leaves office. I just wish he'd go in peace.
Larry Silverstein is interested in building luxury condos on NYCHA property. The quote-unquote affordable housing that would be built on the properties would not be accessible to NYCHA tenants. That ain't right. So, if he wants to build luxury towers on NYCHA property, I say we build housing for the 99% on his property. And I say we do it now. All right, let's go.
Can we help you guys? Yeah. Excuse me, guys. Can we help you?
He assaulted him.
Mic check! Mic check! We are here in the lobby of Larry Silverstein, who has done so much to hurt the 99% and to try to make New York City accessible only to the rich. But we say, get out of the way. It's a new day for New York, and we are constructing NYCHA towers on top of Mr. Silverstein's construction. All right.
This is private property. You have to exit. Now. This is private property. You have to exit.
No justice.
No peace.
No justice. No peace.
No justice. No peace.
Mic check.
Mic check.
Mic check.
Mic check. Mic check.
The police have asked if we can leave the private property. They will allow us to march on the public sidewalk outside the building. Those who do not want to be arrested might want to follow those instructions. Those who are interested and previously prepared, otherwise, follow your own lead. This is private property. And those who do not want to break the law should know that.
No justice! No justice! Fair housing is a right! 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 Mic check! Mic check! We have with us from Community Voices Heard a NYCHA tenant named Madeline Innocent.
We are here today to tell Silverman we are not giving up our homes.
We're not giving up our homes. Hell no.
We are not giving up our homes.
To make the rich richer. It is a discrimination. That they are treating low-income people like animals.
They're treating low-income people like animals.
Shortest phrases.
Oh, okay. We're also here today to tell Bloomberg it's time to go.
It's time to go. And now we have with us Jim Lister
I'm here.
I'm here
because I.
Sorry.
Mic check.
Mic check.
Mr. Lister
Mr. Lister
is a little shaken up
is a little shaken up
because security broke his glasses and have cut him in the face. We just wanted to say to Jim Lister that you're among friends and we care about you. The 99% takes care of its own. I met Jim Lister 5 years ago in a campaign to stop people with AIDS from being evicted from their homes. The governor's office was okay with vetoing the bill, citing it costs too much money. Yet our mayor, who pushed the governor to veto the bill, has no problem with giving $1.1 billion, and that's billion with a B, to billionaires who don't need tax abatements. Jim is here with us because he wants to keep his home. And to tell Mr. Silverstein to get out of the way. Now, since the police look like they mean business, and I don't want anybody else with lacerations or broken glasses, we are going to the celebration rally at City Hall Park. But rest assured, we rattled some cages, and surely, Mr. Silverstein has been put on notice and knows that he needs to get out of the way so that the 99% can build a New York City for all of us. All right.
We're going to take a police report from you on the assault, okay? So I'll stay with you. We'll do that once we get people out, okay? Just stay right here.
We'll be back. We live around the corner. We'll be back. We live around the corner. We'll be back. We live around the corner. We'll be back. We'll be back.
We're not going to leave us out. And I was right next to
We'll be back. We'll be back. Fight, fight. Housing is the right. Fight, 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 fight, fight.
Great show.
Yeah, it was a fun demonstration.
Yeah.
It was cold that day, but the thing that was great about it is that I was convinced that by the time we got down to the World Trade Center that they would know we were coming and that the lobby would be locked up tight. They were not expecting us at all. And we just walked right in with all those tall skyscraper buildings.
Well, it's good that there were some voices to be heard.
Yeah,
And,
it was a fun demonstration.
yeah.
It's too bad Jim had his glasses broken and got cut here and here. It looked pretty grim.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is a film made by a father-daughter team who are doing a project documenting the Mitchell-Lama program,
Right.
which, you know, I'm really looking forward to seeing more of their work. But they want to cover stuff like this too. So
That's wonderful. You know, I was thinking earlier about, you know, we're talking with woman about affordable housing and how things have changed. I mean, if you think about the politicians we used to have in Washington and in Albany, they used to do things like, Franklin Roosevelt had public housing built. And, we had Mitchell-Lama housing here. And we've had expansion of Section 8. So there was a real effort in recognizing that in this economy,
no one's doing it now.
The average person can't afford the cost of housing. And so now we have, it's no surprise that with the gradual, demise or the cutbacks in rent protections and the loss of subsidized housing, we now see over 50,000 homeless people in the city, including over 20,000 children. This is what happens. It's the logical consequence of that kind of neglect, and that's all it is neglect. And for those people who say, oh, the market will take care of it, just let the market do its thing.
Thank you, Mike Bloomberg.
The market doesn't, and the market didn't. The market, we went through a couple of centuries in the city's history where we showed that the markets regularly fail.
That's trickle down doesn't work. Okay, now we have another call. Hello? Hello?
Hello, yes.
Hi, you're on the air.
Yes, I'm calling. Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Yes, first of all, I'd like to say your show is great.
Thank you.
And I just want to ask a question. I want to know what is the session rights and what is the protocol?
Okay. Succession is a very important subject, and it's a complicated one, and we're not going to have time to go into all the ins and outs. Essentially, succession is a right of a family member to take over the tenancy, to become the tenant of the apartment when the tenant of record moves or dies. And that exists under rent control, rent stabilization, Mitchell-Lama, Section 8, and various other kinds of housing. So it's a very important thing, and it's something people who are in this kind of situation where tenants have family members and the tenant might be planning to move or maybe getting older, and you want to make sure that your family members have the right to remain when you leave, need to educate themselves about this. So in a nutshell, just in a couple of
quick things. First of all, if you're on the lease, you don't need succession rights. If there's two people on, one leaves, you don't need them. If you're a spouse, you have a right to be added to a rent-stabilized lease upon renewal. If you are a family member or you fall within a class of immediate family members, you are entitled to succession as long as you can generally prove that you've been there for 2 years while the tenant was still in occupancy as the tenant's primary residence. In some cases, the period is shortened to 1 year. But there is also, for those people who are rent stabilized, there is a form that can be submitted to the owner and filed, which indicates that you are, in fact, an occupant of that unit and creates a presumption that you are indeed living in the unit during that period.
I always advise tenants to consult an attorney about this early, before succession becomes an issue. And in many cases, it's somewhat straightforward. In other cases, it can be extremely complicated.
Yes.
And people can take actions now that will cause the family member to have problems down the road when they want to assert the right of succession. So I think it's always a good idea to sit down with a tenant lawyer and either legal services or legal aid or a private attorney, private bar attorney, and say, this is our situation. What can we do? How can we strengthen the case for the family member to take over the apartment? But we don't really have time to go into detail. If you want more information, caller, I would urge you to call the Met Council hotline number, and that's every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 1:30 to 5, and you can talk to a live person who can go into more detail.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks for calling. Good luck.
Bye-bye, thank you.
I mean, it frustrates me when people do things that complicate or make it hard for people to succeed to the apartment down the road.
Your advice to get an attorney beforehand is dead on, because so many people don't recognize that the little things, mistakes that they make can lead to disastrous consequences.
Including not telling the landlord when a vacancy occurs. Like there have been cases where the family member continued to pay the rent in the tenant's name for 12 or 15 or 20 years
Right.
after the tenant died.
Right.
And in that case, people are likely going to lose the apartment. They won't have the right of succession. It's important to tell the landlord when it happens, but it's also much more important to get good, competent legal advice.
And recognize that owners will challenge almost any
Almost
succession
anyone.
case where the rent is low.
That's correct. And where there's any kind of infirmity in the case, if there's something the tenant has done or the family member has done that weakens their case, that encourages the landlord to take them to court, and sometimes the landlord wins.
That's correct.
So people should be very careful about this, and they need to educate themselves about it before it happens. And you know, it frustrates me when people call and say, well, my father died or my husband died or whatever, 5 years ago. What have you done? Nothing. I mean, it's really very dangerous. So anyway, Tim, thank you very much.
Great show. Really enjoyed
Happy
it.
New Year, and we will do this again.
Looking forward to it.
You've been watching Tenant Action Today. We're on the air every Wednesday from 6 to 7 p.m. Thanks for watching, and please tune in again next week.